course, you've become familiar with her dynamic range of accomplishments in the area of studies and writings on Joyce, Judaism, and literature. It's quite impressive, and you will realize why she's eminently qualified to address us today on this important subject. We've been trying to have Marilyn come back with us for a number of years now, and she was here before, and we just figured out it's actually 25 years ago.
Wow.
Here you addressed this very room with Louis Lenton, Joel Goldberg, Raphael Serf,
yes.
and
there were some other various other kinds of Joyce scholars who would come. And it was an event that was hosted at the Joyce Symposium at the time.
So such was the impression you left behind that we've been trying ever since to get her back. And here she is, and we are so glad that you are here. Marilyn is the Harrison King McCann Professor of English at Bowdoin College in Maine, and she works in the area of modernist studies, contemporary Scottish and Irish literatures and film, Jewish cultural studies, the history of ideas. She has written widely on the work of James Joyce and other modernist writers. She's the author of James Joyce's Judaic Other, co-editor of Ulysses, Engendered Perspectives, 18 new essays on the episodes, and a contributor to Collaborative Dubliners, Joyce in Dialogue. Her recent book project is Unfit, The Jewish Signs of Modernism, and she's working on a monograph of Muriel Sparks' literary style, The Art of Ridicule. Now in this lecture, Marilyn draws on her correspondence with the late Joel Goldberg to offer some new perspectives on Joyce, and we're all very keen to hear about this rapport that was established on Marilyn's last visit when Joel Goldberg was with us. And we're so excited to learn more about this today, and of course we are delighted that David is with us in the audience to perhaps add something a little later to the address. So thank you very much. Please give a warm welcome to
Thank you so much, and thank you for your persistence, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for coming out today. And I hope that I'm here to try to do Gerald Goldberg some justice, and I hope I will do that. I mean, others have done it, and there's justice out there for him, but especially on the topic of Joyce, I think Gerald's contributions perhaps are not as well known, and I hope I'm going to rectify that to some degree today. So, so here is a bit of a PowerPoint. And, this is Gerald, who took me to see the sites, the Joyce sites in Cork, and this is one of the Cork Joyce sites. Unfortunately, I've forgotten the address, and there he was with his dog, and I took the picture, obviously. This is a quotation from Gerald, and I'm going to come back to it. I'm using it as a kind of epigraph for this talk, although the actual title here is on Gerald Goldberg, Zichrono Livracha, to his memory. Okay, so in Gerald Goldberg, a tribute, one of the editors, Dermot Keogh, concludes his introduction in this way. I associate Gerald Goldberg with great generosity of spirit. He is prepared to share his knowledge, his experience, his wisdom, his books, and his archives with students and teachers alike. He had a very deep and wide knowledge of history, of literature, of the visual and performing arts, and of Judaism. His eloquence and his wisdom will live on because he was, in a single word, a rabbi, that is, a teacher. Now, I am one of those students and teachers, and I wanted to take the opportunity of this kind invitation from the museum to pay my own tribute to Gerald's generosity, but particularly to the advancement of our knowledge about Joyce. I was reminded of this recently when I found a trove of materials sent or given me by Gerald on the topic of the Jews in Ireland, with specific guidance for my work on the Jewish backgrounds to Joyce's work, about which I had contacted him in the early 1980s. I was then a postgraduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, working with Philip Herring and David Heyman. I had attended the Joyce Symposium in Dublin in 1982, which celebrated the centenary of Joyce's birth, and been directed to Gerald Goldberg, former mayor of Cork. My topic had caused some concern among my professors at Wisconsin. I remember that in preparation to go on the job market, as we delicately refer to it in the States, faculty staff conducted mock interviews with prospective job seekers. I was asked why I was bringing such a narrow perspective to such a major writer. You mean the Judeo-Christian traditions? I responded. They laughed, but they told me not to respond that way in an actual interview. Too sassy, and finally not addressing their concern, which was to them very real. The topic was, to coin a phrase, too Jewish. I remember when applying for a Fulbright Award to study at the James Joyce Foundation in Zurich, my advisor responded to my research proposal by worrying that the readers would think I was a member of the JDL, the Jewish Defense League, a radical organization prominent in the 1970s and 80s that defended Zionism and the State of Israel against those who protested its right to exist. And the Palestinian plight, land annexation, occupation, Sabra and Shatila. And I just as an aside, I'll say, remind me later to tell you an anecdote about Gerald and Yasser Arafat. I'll just put that aside. I was amazed at the proposal to extend the discussion of the role of Jewishness played in a major modern novel, that the role of Jewishness played in a major modernist novel, whose famous writer had chosen as its protagonist, and at least Jewish, Leopold Bloom. Was it all radical or controversial? Of course, I was bucking the then commonplace idea that Bloom was Stephen Dedalus's foil. Hard to imagine now. I remember being introduced to Richard Ellman, eminent literary scholar and Joyce biographer, at the Joyce Symposium in Dublin in 1982, and tentatively telling him about my topic. He had written some about it in his biblical biography of Joyce. There's not much in it, you know, he quite casually and devastatingly stated. I remember those words exactly. Oy, I thought. This is not a radical proposition I have undertaken, but maybe a foolhardy one. I was also somewhat incensed. The great Richard Ellman must be wrong. I proceeded to psychoanalyze him. He was clearly repressing his own Jewishness. I remember relaying this to Gerald, and 6 years later, sometime after Ellman's death, when I had already completed my dissertation and was working at Bowdoin, I was walking with Ellman's daughter, Maud, an eminent scholar in her own right, and telling her of my conversation with her father. We were at the Joyce Symposium in Venice in 1988, and she had just delivered a beautiful eulogy for her father in the form of a talk called The Ghosts of Ulysses. At some point toward the end of her talk, I had to leave the room, having been overcome by a similar grief, not for Richard Ellman, but for my own father, who had died the same year. I often tell the story that there were several women in the bathroom wiping their eyes, all experiencing the same grief for an absent father. She and I became friends by commiserating and then discussing our backgrounds, our Jewish ones. That seemed fitting. In her talk that day in 1986, and in the article by that name, Maud suggests she is the ghost of her own father, finding my name, this is her, lying in ambush in almost every critical account of Joyce, and yet that name is always destined elsewhere to my father. And now that he is dead, it only seems to come into its own, since it was always fated to become his sepulcher and mine. She is referring to Stephen Dedalus's puzzling theory that Hamlet is the ghost of his own father, who in Shakespeare's play says that he's, you know, that is in Shakespeare's play, Hamlet's father appears to him as a ghost. It suggests, in her poignant eulogy, Ellman recounts several dreams about her father. In one, he is described as having gone into diaspora, which she interprets as a remission from his diseases. He had the crippling ALS, but sees as a more accurate description because, as she says, he had not been erased, but circumfused among our dreams and in his incomparable books. In another dream, he comes to her as a ghost, and they have an exchange about his death and departure, both in and outside of the dream. She says, "I miss you," and he responds, "How can you miss me when I'm right here?" After he leaves, she asks everyone in the room in her dream, "Was that not my father?" And no one can deny it. In the picture that she draws, Ellman locates the trace of the attachments and departures in who she is and what she has become. For while the subject of her talk is ostensibly her father, it is also their ghostly relations throughout a wide network. It is complex. Identity is an affair of relations, William James said. Her father's name ambushes her, not only because of his eminence and preeminence, as it were, but because of the patronate. It trumps her, if you'll pardon the expression. Her father as writer, as legend, has gone into diaspora. He is not dead. His work, his memory, his name lives on, but neither is he at home. In a sense, one never is if one thinks about these networks of affiliation. Without fully acknowledging it in the essay, Maud uses a word that is, of course, Jewishly inflected: diaspora. The diaspora, as she uses it, becomes the afterlife of her father's famous work, a suggestion that the departure from an origin is a loss, but does not diminish or prevent from thriving. It will replace the idea of literary immortality, let's say, with this idea of displacement or dispersal. The circumfusion is perhaps literarily territorial. Not everyone reads Ellman, or Joyce for that matter, but the work knows no borders. To borrow from Auden's elegy for Yeats, the words of the dead man are modified in the guts of the living. My discussion so far has run only parallel to my aim here to talk about what I learned from Gerald Goldberg. I do not wish to presume, and I hope David will indulge me, when I say the themes of fathers here is relevant, not just because of the way Gerald treated and supported me. He was sort of a Doktorvater, which is the German for an academic advisor, but because of the importance of fathers in Joyce's work, which touches on ideas about authority, inheritance, the whole network, Jewish forefathers. Accordingly, there are three topics I want to touch on today: diaspora, Zionism, and legacy. One salient aspect of Gerald's life, of course, is the story of his origins in Ireland, about which I knew through my discussions with him and reading the interviews and articles he and others wrote about the Jews in Ireland, materials he provided me or directed me toward. The story of his father's arrival in Ireland on his way to America seemed apocryphal, and yet historians confirm that this was a common phenomenon. Lacking money and strength, they were assured that America was the next parish. English was the sound key. The Irish willingness to receive these immigrant Jews was also key. In preparation for this talk, I read and was aided, of course, by the tribute to Gerald, edited by Dermot Keogh and Dermot Whelan. But I was surprised to find there hardly a reference to Joyce. Gerald had a passion for Joyce, to wit all the wonderful work he did on Joyce and the Jewish Dimension, the subtitle for his 1982 article in Cranebag on the occasion of the centenary of the publication of Ulysses, the year I met Gerald. Ireland is the only country, is the first part of the title. He wonders there, in this article, whether there would have been a book called Ulysses without the Jews of Cork, particularly, quoting him, whether the multifaceted Bloom could otherwise have taken root in the mind of his creator. The full title again is Ireland is the Only Country, ellipsis, Joyce and the Jewish Dimension. And that, Ireland is the Only Country, makes reference to Deasy's rhetorical question to Stephen Dedalus in the Nestor chapter. Here's Deasy. I just wanted to say, he said, Ireland, they say, has the honor of being the only country that never persecuted the Jews. Did you know that? No. And do you know why? Stephen plays along, beginning to smile when asking for the reason. The answer Deasy delivers solemnly, according to the text, because she never let them in. It is rhetorical because it works like a riddle, one of the tropes of that chapter, where the punchline or answer is foretold. In one way, if when you let the Jews in, they will be persecuted. It goes without saying, or with repeated saying. I just wanted to say, he said, they say, etc. But it is untrue, you say. Ireland, of course, did admit Jews. Many have considered this as one among other factual errors in the chapter. I have to use this. Alternative facts. Sorry, I had to do it. Being Daisy's bailiwick. Apart from the repeated trope of the riddle for the chapter overall, it is the repeated saying of "we never persecuted the Jews" that is the production of the myth of cover for anti-Semitic acts in Ireland that the repetition accomplishes and is performed here between Deasy and Stephen. You find the repetition of this myth everywhere in the annals of writing on the topic of the Jews of Ireland, and fewer instances of correction, as that by the Landleague's Michael Davitt, though he too, as we learn, was at first scurrilous in his comments about Jews. And he too repeats the myth, even while condemning anti-Semitism in Russia. This is him. Are not historical conditions and centuries of deliberate oppression in every Christian land, Ireland honorably accepted, answerable for the Hebrew predilection to profit-seeking by other than methods of immediate production? It's a dizzying pronouncement of damning defense. Even Arthur Griffith, notoriously anti-Semitic, repeated the claim in the form of "there is no anti-Semitic spirit in Ireland," in response to an Ulster unionist rabbi who worried that the advent of home rule would occasion an outbreak of anti-Semitism. Gerald helped me to understand all this. In fact, just about everything I'm using or quoting today was sent or suggested to me, or I was directed toward by Gerald. Even when I might be speaking within a wide network of relations, all the others who directly or indirectly have benefited by his work. In Ireland is the only country, Gerald writes, when the question of Bloom's religion is discussed, it is of importance to understand that Joyce did not do anything by halves. This is a telling idiom, coming from after a long discussion of Bloom's Jewishness, as I like to say. His mixed parentage, his faulty Jewish education, the kind children get in religious instruction after school, Hebrew school as we call it in the States, a dreaded institution for American children who learn for the bar bat mitzvah. It is a reminder always of their estrangement from their environs, from their national habitat. Bloom's multiples conversions seem more displacements than placements. Gerald quotes the famous exchange between Stephen and Bloom in Ithaca, where the language itself equivocates on the question of Bloom's Jewishness. He thought that he was a Jew, whereas he knew that he knew that he knew that he was not. And earlier in Eumaeus, without deviating from plain facts, I'm quoting, Bloom tells Stephen that he told the citizen that Christ was a Jew like me, though he demurs. In reality, I'm not. Bloom is referencing the earlier scene in Cyclops, where the citizen, a composite figure of many of these rough bigots, throws the tin at Bloom, who is laying claim by exactly half to his Jewish affiliation. Mendelssohn was a Jew, and Karl Marx and Mercadante and Spinoza, Christ, your God, was a Jew like me. These references are all in some way to half or non-Jews, converts, apostates. The avowals build throughout the passage, but always double back to unravel, like Penelope's weave, like Joyce's narrative style. Not half-baked, but unfinished. Now, I've spent some time with these lines, but my approach to them and capacity to contextualize them from within Irish letters I owe to Gerald's scrupulous research and generosity, which I have always acknowledged. But in looking back, I see something also reflected in his sensibility about the interface of his own Jewishness and Irishness, as the epigraph to this talk reveals, and is often revealed in Gerald's interviews and writings. As he said, life for Jews in Ireland was not easy, but some stayed and learned to love this land. Joyce did not half get it. I want to quote at length from an interview with Gerald conducted by interviewer Vincent Power in an Evening Echo article of Face to Face, special section Face to Face, on April 28, 1983. It may be stating the obvious, he begins, but have you ever felt a rarity being among such a small group of Jews in Cork? Gerald's response, of course I have felt that I am a rarity. Of course I have felt that I am an exception. Of course I've had to face the accusation that having been born into a Zionist family associated with the foundation of a Jewish home in Israel, I should be in Israel. The answer is that I should. I was asked twice by the government of Israel to go there. I could have been a member of the Supreme Court in the state of Israel rather than a practicing solicitor in the city of Cork. But I am essentially an Irishman. I am essentially a Corkman. As a Jew who is both, I realized that I owed a debt to the people of Ireland and to the city of Cork, which I could only repay by remaining here and endeavoring to make a full-hearted and complete contribution to the development of the Irish Republic once it was formed. And so I stayed. But my conscience from time to time tells me that I did not do right by the Jewish people, and I have to live with that. I believe I made the right decision, and it is not one I would now change. Did you follow the back and forth of that? How to understand what seems emphatically equivocal. A thinking I should have gone to Israel, a determination to be in Ireland, a criticism of historical Irish treatment of Jews, a vindication of Ireland by the fact of his well-being, Ireland's early and ongoing ambivalence about the state of Israel. We may be reminded famously from Bloom's lips, nothing doing, still an idea behind it. Of course, as Gerald also recounts, he had reasons to be ambivalent about Ireland, with the violence of the Limerick anti-Semitic incidents directly affecting his family. Joyce scholars came to recognize the importance of these events for Ulysses, both an understanding of the way myth functions and history demurs. Further, Ireland's own contradictory stances with regard to the establishment and recognition of the State of Israel becomes part of this backdrop. Arthur Griffith accuses Jews' loyalties are elsewhere, he says. He forms a nation apart where he goes, bound by the most solemn obligation to the achievement of national restoration and revenge. There is this pressure to be full-hearted on one's patriation. Thinking back to Gerald's remarks, but half-heartedness might be a chronic condition, even for the new Israeli. Griffith complains, while also praising Jews for their nationalist impulse and for the revival of the Hebrew language. Israel, he said, was the triumph of Sinn Féin, by which you might understand him to say both that it provides a model of nationalist resolution and that its nationalist resolution has eliminated unwanted elements in Ireland. As a bit of an aside here, Aidan Beattie, another beneficiary, I would argue, of Gerald's work, made the case before this audience about the parallel between Irish and Jewish nationalism, and he used the Hebrew expression bar shilton, fit to govern, drawing an interesting distinction in his talk about the differences in language revival, Hebrew becoming a vernacular, and Irish having more symbolic value and therefore not succeeding. Also that it was a language of defiance. In Hebrew, of course, we have the spoiling of a holy language in the rejection of a ghetto. And what Aidan misses is that the Irish, too, might have had an ambivalence about a return to a language that defined them as subpar. They were in some instances, I hope you won't mind me saying that, instances as rebellious against the reinstatement of Irish as the new Israelis were regarding the maintenance of Yiddish in the Promised Land. The non-realization of this idea would, of course, be applauded by Joyce. In Dermot Keogh's contribution to the tribute to Gerald, called Making Aliyah, Irish Jews, the Irish State, and Israel, he outlines this bumpy history of Ireland's response to Israel. How, for example, the issue of Christian holy sites needing to be situated in international territory, was a point of ongoing contention, even while recognizing the historical parallels in national movements between the Jews and the Irish. I was struck particularly by a policy statement by Sean McBride in 1949, who was then Minister for External Affairs in Ireland. This is him. "We know how cruelly and unjustly the Jewish people have suffered from intolerance and persecution throughout the centuries. I personally am glad that our pages of history have never been stained with anything of the kind. On the contrary, I think we can claim that our common suffering from persecution and certain similarities in the history of the two races create a special bond of sympathy and understanding between the Irish and Jewish peoples." There we have it again, the myth. Yet Keogh frames the quotation with a comment about the people of Ireland justly claiming to have been more successful in closing the gulf between Christians and Jews than most other Christian countries. Coming or going, coming and going. Let me conclude by turning more substantively to Ulysses as a way of marking Joyce's treatment of the bond between Irish and Jews and the ambivalence of the coming and going, and the way that those are registered in the way Joyce tells the story. Ulysses is famously, if not exemplarily, modernist, so we have that kind of attenuated ending, the well-known "yes, I will, yes," which does not seem at all affirming or conclusive. And I want to apply this idea to Joyce's treatment of Zionism as a bumpy narrative. Maybe wavering, maybe unrealizable. Bloom's nothing doing still. What seems like equivocation, wandering. The Jew as a flashpoint figure for Joyce and for Ireland in 1904 still seems to surprise many, in part because Jews played a much smaller part in the local Ireland of Joyce's youth than its prominence in the novel might suggest. One might argue that it's just as much the Homeric epic that informs Joyce's novel, since Odysseus too is fated to leave home soon after he returns. But that does not account for the way Zionism is written all over, really overwrites Ulysses. I suggested elsewhere that Ulysses foresees a bad or unsatisfactory or inconclusive end in the nationalisms pervade in the novel. All of them. At the very least, the novel worries the nationalist ideal. So, and here's a small example in Ulysses of Joyce's deployment of the markers of Zionism, especially the Exodus trope. The A-list chapter of Ulysses, which takes place in a newspaper room, associated in Joyce's symbolic schema for the chapter with a windiness of speech, or hot air, brings together several related elements of degeneracy, deliverance, fitness, unfitness with Jewishness and Irishness, through the rhetorical devices of speech and speech acts. It is a kind of echo chamber or wind tunnel, if you will, of struggling and flawed national heroes, whose flaws reflect more on their projects than on their persons, in Joyce's formulations. We have discussed the chapter literally reproduces John F. Taylor's famous speech made in 1901, in which he establishes an analog between the Israelites and the Irish, and the Egyptians with the British within the liberation allegory. The speech is recalled as the men in the office rehearsed the debates of the day around home rule, political allegiances, and the revivalism of the Irish language in particular. Taylor is remembered as a great orator with a nationalist position, but his speech is misremembered by these pundits. For example, Taylor's phrase of Moses' act in Exodus, who comes down from Sinai bearing in his arms the writing of God graven upon the tables, here becomes the table of the law graven in the language of the outlaw. As such, it makes the revivalist case, the Irish language. But it originates neither with Taylor nor the Bible. Joyce seems to be recording, for the record, literally, Roger Casement's rendering of Taylor's speech. And in doing so, he adds another element to the atmosphere of possible betrayal performed by words taken out of context. Casement, you may know or remember, was an Irishman who was an operative in Britain's colonial project, finally rebelling against their colonial excesses in the mistreatment of native populations. He returned to Ireland to take up the Irish cause against the British, who promptly hanged him for treason, using his diary's record of homosexual encounters, forged or not, to distract from Casement's charges. Now, there's no sound here, so if there were, and I'm sorry about that, you would hear Joyce reading this passage. And he decided in 1924 to record, he made a few recordings from Ulysses, and he decided to record this speech. I don't know if some of you probably heard it before. I'm sorry, I meant to ask if we have sound. I beg your pardon. And by the way, yeah, probably won't, unless you have, yeah. It would have come up immediately if there were speakers. So this passage begins, and a dumb belch of hunger cleft his speech, and he lifted his voice above it boldly. And then Joyce's voice comes on, and he's reading this speech, right? So he's assuming the voice of the speech maker. The invocation, if you look, and I'll just read it. But ladies and gentlemen, had the youthful Moses listened to and accepted that view of life, had he bowed his head and bowed his will and bowed his spirit before that arrogant admonition, he would never have brought the chosen people out of their house of bondage, nor followed the pillar of the cloud by day. He would never have spoken with the Eternal amid lightnings on Sinai's mountaintop, nor ever have come down with the light of inspiration shining in his countenance and bearing in his arms the tables of the law, graven in the language of the outlaw. While I'm reading, maybe look at the rest of this. And I really just reproduced the cadence in Joyce's speech in the way he reads this. Obviously, my voice and his are quite different, but the cadence is exactly that. The invocation of Moses is also crucial here, both in his role as deliverer and, as the passage makes clear, as a conduit of political speech. One of Moses' flaws was, remarkably, his flawed slowness of speech. Moses' fate recalls that of Charles Stewart Parnell, the famous Home Rule Irish leader of the late 19th century, who, as you know, was thwarted by the Irish themselves, one would say, and died young, and was also apparently an ineffectual speechifier. Again, remarkably. And yet he died without having entered the land of promise, the text rehearses. In response to the voicing of Moses' fate of not making to the promised land in the passage above, the deadbeat, somewhat droll Lenehan, a clever and resourceful dissolute and miscreant who appeared earlier in Joyce's fiction, remarks with a certain self-reflexivity and with a great future behind him. This tense construction, a backshadowing or reverse prolepsis, sets such visions or eschatology in a perpetual future anterior. In other words, it has already not happened, and that is always already not going to happen. That is, he will not enter the promised land. The promised land will not be reached. This is reminiscent, one might say, of Robert Emmett's famous speech at the dock, in which he says that his epitaph will be written only when his country takes her place among the nations of the world. And yet, since that is his epitaph, it sort of leaves Ireland in perpetual suspension and not reaching the promised land. This conflation of Moses and Parnell, in combination with an attenuated nationalist vision through displaced speech, and invokes Theodore Herzl and what became his Zionist motto, "It is no dream," Ein zo agada, which became the Hebrew catchphrase associated with Herzl's manifesto and is a literal translation of the German phrase kein Märchen, part of Das ist es Juden, kein Märchen, kein Betrug. That's it, Jews. It's no fable, it's no deception. Though it came to represent Herzl's political vision and is associated with his manifesto, the full phrase, "If you wish it, it is no dream," derives in this variant form from an epigraph to Herzl's novelistic rendering of the Zionist vision in his utopian novel, Alt Neuland, Old New Land. Ironically, it is a fiction, this fictional novel, or a legend that provides the grounding slogan, one that requires active willing or wishing to realize the dream, the promised land. The phrase and Herzl's vision become legend, and for him never more than that. He died young in 1904. Like Moses, like Cornell, the fulfillment of a state that was for him only dreamlike. Legend is also a punningly apt word for the Aeolus chapter that is graphically organized by headings that are often misleading or non-representative, romantically or parodically inclined, such as "Let us hope," which is, by the way, the heading right after this passage. And that's, I won't get into what happens after that, but again, I think all very much sort of, positioned for a particular fact that I'm describing here about the unrealization of this dream, of this aim. Now, this is a passage about myth-making and the adjustment and corruption of myths or ideals, just as the repetition of "Ireland is the only country never to have persecuted the Jews" is a denegation defined by Freud as an act of denial which has embedded in it an admission of guilt. But also, perhaps, it is a wish to be above reproach. It is telling, if you will pardon the pun, that Joyce chose this passage to record in 1924. In his dramatic reading, he assumes a character, lending his voice to the many who have repeated and misrepeated the national vision. More networks of affiliation. Returning once more to the epigraph of this talk, I would like to be remembered as a Jew and as a Corkman, and I don't ask for anything else. You might see how these terms were sometimes seemingly contradictory. Again, to quote Auden, "even in the valley of their saying." And therefore, the wish was hard to realize, reflected in the fervor with which Gerald would repeat this idea in his letters. Perhaps like Richard Ellman, he resides in a kind of diaspora, well, both always and never at home. I'm here to acknowledge his considerable legacy in a way that Ellman could not, since he didn't think there was much in the Jewish subject. Toward the conclusion of this lengthy letter to me, this is the very last page, I'm sorry, it's probably hard to read. Undated, but written around the time of the Jewish New Year in 1983. And it begins, and I know that because it begins with a wish for a Shana Tova. And that year, in 1983, Erev Rosh Hashanah was September 7th. Gerald writes, "I want to say to you about your trials and tribulations. Do not despair. Finish your dissertation. It's of the utmost importance that you should do so." Thank you, Gerald.